Right. So what we have discussed in the previous session about the RFP part, request for proposals, RFP documentation, all that. So now I'm going to discuss today about the project management part, because project management approaches are essentially important, because project management planning has to be done by the project management team. So when we talk about project management team responsibilities to understand with, this has some slight variation comparing from traditional to agile, because traditional agile project management process is something different from agile way of approach. Because in the traditional way of application development, sometimes, of course, in the olden days I'm talking about, the project used to be delivered at one point in time. Over a period of time, nowadays, if you see, when we are transforming ourselves into an agile environment, whatever the transformation we have seen so far and whatever the deliverables in reference to the work, what is that we have completed, so it's completely moved towards the agile way of approach. When and wherever it is needed, that can be delivered to the customer according to the requirement, because the requirements we were developing in such a way where everything will be converted into epics, user stories, all that. So there are two differences which I am going to explain you first. So one is the traditional way of approach followed by agile way of approach. So when you see a traditional way of approach, where it's a linear process which we are following for a very long time, where project planning, right? So at the same time, scope, risk analysis, right? So all these things comes under that part. But whereas as far as the approach in reference to the agile process itself is concerned, it's completely a rapid iteration part, where whatever the iterations we wants to do based upon the requirement what customer has, development can be taken place. That's how generally the agile mindset is all about, because agile requires continuous delivery, continuous increments are required. CI/CD, I can say, if someone is using DevOps and all that comes into account, because earlier you see application developer as well as testing team as well as deployment teams are separate, because deployment team is separate. Deployment team responsibility is to deploy the application based on the work which is done by the team members. So there are possibilities that there are some lagging in reference to the work, what is that they do and what is their understand level. Followed by this, there are possibilities that lack of coordination might be taken place. In order to remove these impediments, followed by the kind of enhancements which we want to do in the regular requirements, what we have given all that. Nowadays, what is that we are following is called DevOps, right? So this is where generally development and operations means both development as well as operations team works under the same platform. And whatever the kind of tools they use will be different, like something like Jenkins, Kubernetes, Ansible, right? So Nagios, different tools they use. And both implementation followed by testing and deployment will happen in a single phase itself. This is where generally DevOps environment. So nowadays, whatever the development team you see, application development team, that is transformed to the DevOps environment, where complete transformation, where people should be able in a position to act each and everything. Because earlier, if you are a developer, you will be confined only to the coding part. But nowadays, the situation is not something like that. As you know, you need to have multiple skills in reference to the technical part itself is concerned. You need to have that multiple skills are required for you being a person who is working on the application development. So adoption towards DevOps environment is what happening now, is what slowly people are transforming towards. Of course, further they require some tools and techniques, knowledgeable areas and all, everything is required. Because earlier requirements were standstill. It remains standstill and you don't see much changes in it. But over a period of time, it was not the case, where requirements were completely changed in such a way where new requirements were coming and adding into the existing repository. That's how generally the process was changed. So Agile and DevOps combination is what people are using now, because Agile is a way of approach, DevOps is an environment. Please do remember, there are two differences. Agile is an environment, Where this environment has some rules and regulations, there are some policies, procedures which normally we follow. There is an agile manifestation. Agile values are there, right? So agile principles and practices which everybody has to adopt and follow. But technically speaking, if they want to implement the application from the technical perspective, there must be an environment which must be suitable to make changes at any point of stage. For that reason, they are adopting DevOps environment nowadays. So Agile is a way of approach. DevOps is an environment to develop an application. This is completely related to the people who are working on application development, not from the context of any other functional role, something like business analyst or someone. Of course, having knowledge over some sort of exposure towards DevOps environment is not something wrong for BA to know with, because it is easy for them to interact with those people well in advance. But still, this is how generally. So DevOps is an environment, Agile is an approach or a way of approach, I can say. At the same time, DevOps is an environment. This is what generally the combination nowadays we are working on. So in reference to the approach itself is concerned, Agile has a rapid iteration. Rapid iteration means changes can be made at any point in time in the existing project. And whatever the changes you want to make, you can make out of those changes, because this is not something as an approach we need to follow that has to be implemented on the ground level. Because ground level means people development team has to adopt those and they have to work upon. So how they do that? By implementing and by adopting DevOps practices, they can make changes out of it, because you never know when customer changes the requirements. Because nowadays everything is competitive, right? So whatever the requirement customer has now may not be the primary requirement by tomorrow, right? So tomorrow they may be coming up with some other requirements. So in application development, as in when we are providing services to the customer and all, the transformation is what IT companies has to do, because this is something inevitable to do the changes, because we have to transform ourselves whatever the way customer requires, that way we have to transform. Otherwise, there will be of no existence, right? Because if you want to be on race forever, if you want to be on race, we need to understand the situation of the market, because these agile DevOps, all these were introduced in the market because of this reason. So customer requirements, perceptions, expectations, demands are completely changed nowadays. Based on that, the changes should be done accordingly. This is where generally happening now. This is what we call it as rapid iteration stands for, right? Rapid iterations and all. So first point is about characteristics I'm talking about. Traditional project management has a linear approach. At the same time, when we talk about Agile has a rapid iteration. Now, when you're talking about the project scale of the project means I'm talking about the space of the project, size, I can say. Scale means in simple terms, I can say size. Size of the project when you follow traditional practices is large, it's very big. Because the complete project you are developing in traditional project management, where you will be doing some project initiation, you're doing scope management, at the same time you're doing some risk analysis, all that stuff, at the same time budget costing, all these things will be done for the complete project. You're doing for a complete project. But whereas when you are talking about project scale in reference to the Agile itself is concerned is very small and medium. Because whatever the application development we do, everything will be on small chunks, right? Because different small chunks will be taken. So based on the small chunks and all, everything implementation will be taken place. That's how generally the transformation has been taken now. That's not the case if you follow the traditional practices, because in the traditional way of approach, it is something large in terms of the project size itself is concerned. But when you follow the Agile practices and all, everything, it is very small and medium mostly. Means whatever the implementation we do hardly will be on weeks. This is where, if you remember, when we are working on Agile environment, implementation of the work, whatever the duration timelines we have, everything is falls under the weeks part, right? Like 4 weeks, 3 weeks, 2 weeks, 1 week, or else customization of days, right? That's how generally the transformation will be taken place. This is where generally the project scaling and all everything will be done. So scale of the projects, when you follow the traditional practices, which is large in terms of the size of the projects, but whereas when it comes to the Agile and all, it is all small chunks, whatever is required. So that will be taken. We do the estimation part, we complete it and we execute and we deliver it to the customer. and any iterations in near times will be coming. So that will be added into the existing one and it will move further. That's how generally it will be. Now the third characteristic called customer involvement. Customer involvement means involving of the customer, because where customer is involving is what is required and nearly important here. When we are talking about customer involvement in reference to the traditional model is very low, because you don't see any customer involvement. No customer will be directly involving in the project, right? You never see any kind of role of that sort, because you have a project management team, you have a business analyst, we have technical teams, right? So all these people are there. Hence, you don't see any customer involvement in reference to the traditional model and practices. But when you follow agile environment, that is not something that customer involvement will be there in a form of product owner. This is where generally in agile we'll be having three different roles. If you follow Scrum framework, I think guys, you might be knowing about this, right? So Scrum, when the people are following Scrum framework, you'll be having three different roles. One is product owner role, second Scrum team, and Scrum master. These are the three different roles. Product owner is the person who will be acted as a client representative. So product owner is responsible of the work, what is that they were doing. Product owners are the people who has to identify the goal and vision of the product, because based upon the requirement what they have, identifying the goal and vision of the product and developing epics user stories accordingly is what responsibility of a product owner. So product owner will act as a client representative here. So in reference to the role of a product owner, customer involvement is high in agile way of approach. This is point number 3. Now, when we talk about development model, traditional model has a life cycle, and second, agile has an evolutionary delivery. Traditional life cycle models means like analysis will be done first, planning and design will be done next, implementation followed by deployment, delivery, last but not least, of course, maintenance. This is how generally the life cycle process will be taken in application development when you follow SDLC, because that's how generally in traditional model we follow. But when you follow agile itself is concerned, that's not something like analysis, planning, design, all that. It's something more or less, I don't say 100%, but more or less something like a reverse engineering kind of stuff. Reverse engineering means what is that release planning will be done first. Based upon the release planning, implementation will be taken place. That's where generally the difference you see from traditional to agile. In traditional, you are completing the work, you are delivering it to the customer. Whereas in agile approach, the major success as well as the major involvement in agile is that first of all, we'll identify the release, right? What is that they require release, and for how many months they require the first release is what has to be planned first, right? Release planning will be done. Based on the release planning and all, everything is done, followed by this, whatever the MVP, at the same time, the kind of ceremonies we follow, like doing some sprint planning, right? So all these things will be taken, followed by that. That's how generally the sprint planning will be taken later on, not in the beginning of the, not in the beginning of the project, right? So sprint planning and all, everything will be done after that. So before sprint planning, there is a release planning will be made, where product owner will be involved in it, wherein Scrum team and Scrum Master will also be involved in, including this project management team. So those people will be involved here. So release planning will be made. So based on the release planning, for example, this is the release we are planning for the next 2 months. Let's say, for example, 2 months means if you convert into weeks, it will come up somewhere into 8 weeks. I'm not calculating the working days. I'm just calculating the weeks. 8 weeks of time, for example. In 8 weeks, what is that we can complete? So what is the capacity of the team? Because this is where generally team capacity has to be identified by the Scrum Masters. Because Scrum Masters will see how many, for example, if there is a sprint we have taken, which is for 2 weeks, generally working days will be 10, right? 10 working days means how many number of hours they'll work, right? So I'm talking about capacity planning, right? So in reference to that, what is that they do? How many hours average they work? 6 hours. 6 into 5 members, 30 hours. 30 hours into 10 working days. 300 is the maximum capacity. Maximum capacity a team can spend in 2 weeks of the sprint. But actual capacity depends on the people availability. For example, some people are available for 10 working days. Some people may be available for 9 or 8 due to their personal reasons. So sprint to sprint availability of the people based on that number of working hours, what the respective team members will be attending will be different from the maximum capacity part. At the same time, it is completely depends, that is completely impacting on the number of user stories what we have covered so far in that particular sprint, all that. So these are all something like chain linking kind of stuff. When I'm explaining about the capacity planning, velocity and all that, I'll explain the detailed part there. Okay, this is where generally this development model is. So coming back to the point here, in reference to the project management, when we follow traditional practices, the life cycle process, what is that we are following for a very long time, that same thing will be followed here. But whereas when you follow, we are following agile practices, it's an evolutionary delivery here. In this evolutionary delivery, release planning will be made first, based on that implementation will be taken subsequently. This is where generally you see the characteristic in reference to the development model, where you can see the difference between traditional to agile. Next, escalation management. Escalation management is time consuming in traditional, because there is an involvement of hierarchy of involvement of the people which are there in the organization, which is large in terms of the roles are itself is concerned. So it's a time consuming thing, right? So escalation takes time, depends on the kind of roles and responsibilities, as well as the kind of decision making which these people have. Based on that, this time consuming will happen. But whereas when you follow agile practices and all, agile is a prompt escalation management, because you don't see time consuming. There is no time consuming here. Escalation management is completely a prompt one, because whatever the requirements as well as the kind of challenges we got, that will be solved by the Scrum team and all everything, Scrum masters and all everything, with immediate effect. This is where generally impediments of Scrum come into picture. So impediments means whatever the challenges we have come across. Sometimes people may not understand the requirements well in advance. People don't know about the product goal, what is that they want to achieve, or they might not understood the sprint goal, what they want to achieve so far. Or else sometimes there are possibilities that people don't know about the kind of delivery of the work, what is that they are supposed to complete. Maybe they may be lacking in technical understanding. They may not have technical skills. They may be lazy, right? So they may not have the technical infrastructure to do so. So these are the different reasons where impediments come into picture, right? Impediments of Scrum. That's what we call it as. So these impediments of Scrum will be managed by the Scrum Masters, because generally Scrum Masters are the people who will be involved for that context only. Because Scrum Masters, why Scrum Masters we require? Because of that reason. Scrum Masters are the people who will be involving in making sure that work has to be completed on time with all the required deliverables. That is what generally Scrum Master is. Because if the team is performing well, then there is no point in working as a Scrum Master here. But as far as the challenges itself is concerned, team has some challenges in terms of the kind of experience or the kind of requirement what they have, the kind of environment or the situations they were in. So this has to be taken care of by the Scrum Master, right? So immediate impediments will be identified by the people, by the Scrum Masters and all everything, and these escalations will be closed as earliest as immediate. That's what generally we do in Agile, which is prompt. That won't be possible in time consuming, right? So traditionally it is time consuming, but when we are following Agile and all everything, this is something prompt, right? It will happen immediately. Now, when we talk about the project schedule and all everything, risk is very high in traditional, because you never know what kind of requirements will come and add it to the existing repository. You don't know. There are possibilities, whatever the scope we have defined for the project might be deviated due to these reasons, right? Maybe scope deviation might be taken place. So risk in reference to the project schedule will be very high in reference to the traditional project management when we follow, because this is how generally the major problem we'll be facing. But whereas when you follow agile practices and all in reference to the project schedule and all, which is very low in percentage, I can say, because the flexibility of work, what we do and all everything is based upon the priority, because this is where generally priority come into picture. Prioritization is what generally we plan. So based on the priority, normal implementation will be taken place. Whatever the implementation we do, that's completely based upon the priority what we have, all that. So when we are working on the project schedule, risk and all everything, risk is very high in reference to the traditional practices of project management. Whereas when you follow agile and all, project schedule risk and all everything is very low in percentage. I don't say no, because risk will be there when we are working on something. Wherein sometimes we have to assess the risk impact, wherein sometimes we may be required to transfer the risk sometimes. We have to minimize the risk. So different strategies of risk management has to be followed by the project management team. But end of the day, there are possibilities of risk which is involved in it, but which is very low in percentage in agile when we are comparing with the traditional practices, all that. Next, ability to responding to change. Ability to responding to change is a time consuming part in traditional, because as the hierarchy is very big, because the hierarchical process of traditional project management is very large in terms of the roles as well as the responsibilities. So whatever the changes you want to make, you have to meet all the people. You have to come out, cross over everyone, right? So even project management team will be involved in it. Sometimes procurement team will also be involved in it. Wherein at the same time, technical directors or technical people will also get involved, because in what way technically this application is getting impacted, or project budget impact, everything we have to see. This is where generally this I think a change order request, if you remember when I explained about RFPs, RFQs and all, I think in couple of weeks back I have explained you about change order request part. So I think for some reason I have explained it. I think you might have understood. You might have remembered it. So time consuming and difficult. When you want to make any kind of changes, there is an escalation process, which normally there is a structure which people follow, which is time consuming, and it may be difficult sometimes for do make some changes out of it, because changes may be which leads to anything, right? Sometimes it may be a project impact level changes, or it may be budget level changes, or it may be technical changes, or so far. So time consuming and difficult. This is what generally traditional practices are. Now, when we talk about agile and all, it is quick and straightforward. That's what generally it was. Its ability to respond in the change, which must be quick and which must be straightforward. That's what generally in agile we say. Whatever the changes are we going to make out of it, everything must be quick and straightforward. This is where generally changes can be made to the development team. That's the reason why, especially in the part of agile, these changes, whatever the scope changes, if there is any changes to be made into the existing sprint of the issues which customer has already given earlier, so that responsibility will be, normally we will give that responsibility directly to the team itself, right? So we'll be giving to the Scrum team. Scrum team people are the responsible people to make some changes in this. No one else, because no product owner will be involved in it, no Scrum master will be involved, because Scrum team, development team are the responsible people working on the project. So they'll take the responsibility, and whatever the changes to be made, everything will be made by them accordingly. This is where generally this quick and straightforward changes will be made here. So these are the major differences you see when we are following traditional project management versus agile project management, right? So traditional project management approach was something different when you are comparing with agile project management. Is it clear? Or do you have any questions on this regard?
Yes, Raj, it's fine. But one question on reverse engineering, actually, I have attended one interview. They asked me about reverse engineering.
Right.
What is it actually? Because
reverse engineering means you are going from solution to the business problem. Simple. Reverse engineering. Normally, what is that we do? First of all, business problem will be identified. Based on that, solution will be provided. End result is deliverable, right? That's what generally we do. What is reverse engineering? Reverse engineering means what solution you have to provide. For this solution to be provided, what is that the project planning you have to make? That's what we call it as reverse engineering.
All right. Okay. Right? Yeah, got it. Thank you.
Reverse engineering, it's very simple. Reverse engineering means application development. If you see, you understood the problem, you deliver the project, right? So project deliverables will be done. Of course, there are different layers in between. Let us not discuss about all that, right? This is what generally we do. When we are talking about reverse engineering means what must be the project deliverable. What, see, provided, see, when you are going for reverse engineering, please do remember, clarity over the project deliverable, what must be the project deliverable, that clarity is required. If you are missing in that clarity, then that reverse engineering will be a failure. So project deliverables, clarity should be there. Based on the project deliverables, what is that customer is expecting on that, how to do project planning, right? How much time will it be taken for us to complete, right? What are the manpower do we require, right? So how much time will it be taken for us? Is it something really important for us to complete everything in one process? Is what generally we follow in reverse engineering, right? Top to bottom approach is what we follow in pro engineering. In reverse engineering, bottom to top approach. Simple. That's what we follow in Vinay. Of course, I'll take a special class in reverse engineering for you guys.
Okay.
In future, I'll take it.
Oh, right. Okay.
Just
Thank you.
Question for your answer. I just given you a short note, right? Not the detailed one. I'll explain some other time in coming days. Okay.
Okay, right. Thank
Any
you.
questions on this regard, Mr. Power? Oh, I think yeah. Okay, it's okay. Power is on meeting. No problem. Right, Vinay. Right. So this is what generally the differences you can see from traditional to agile practices, all that. Now, this is how generally the overall life cycle of the project timelines, whatever you see from the waterfall to agile. This is where generally diagrammatical representation, which I am showing you here. Because whatever the one which I have shown you earlier are the differences between a traditional to agile is what I have shown you. But here I am talking about the differences of the waterfall to agile. Because in waterfall model, as I stated some time back, there will be some project planning will be made, creation of the project we do the review, followed by the release, which must be our final outcome. That's what generally the thing which we follow in waterfall. But when you are following agile project management, that's not something that this agile project management, out of your comfort understanding, this can be divided into 3 different outcomes. One is preliminary outcome, second may be intermediate outcome, third is a final outcome. The session may be ended in next 10 minutes, right? So if there is any discontinuation of meeting, please do join again. Okay, right. So preliminary outcome will be done first based on the intermediate outcome and final outcome. Preliminary outcome means even the implementation, whatever we do, it will be done till release part. So preliminary, we complete a phase of the application, what customer has given, and we have delivered it. Upon that, if there is any changes, for example, in the sprint, what is that we have planned? For example, sprint planning is for 2 weeks, where some requirements were given by the customer. Over a period of time, we got to know and we came to know that there are some changes to be made to the existing ones. What is that we do? We don't want to deviate the goal of the sprint. Sprint goal should not get deviated. So what we do now, in spite of it, simply we transform the rest of our things to the next sprint. Implementation will be taken place in the next sprint. This is how generally the agile overall process and progresses generally, which normally we follow. So this is where generally you see the difference between waterfall to agile model is all about. Clear? Do you understand this? Okay.
Okay.
Now, when we are talking about, thank you. And when we are talking about agile planning process, this is how generally the agile planning process will be. Yeah. This is what generally agile planning process will be. There are different steps are there in agile planning process in reference to this. The step 1 is to, of course, I'll give you a detailed statement in coming time. So this is an overall understanding I'm giving. So one is about product vision and scope is what the first step was. Second, we need to build a product roadmap. Third, we need to create a release planning in the third step. Followed by this, in the fourth step, we do sprint planning. After that, daily scrum and stand-up meetings, sprint review and retrospection. And whatever that 3-4 things you are seeing, like these are all we call it as agile scrum ceremonies, right? These are all we call it as scrum ceremonies. Sprint planning, daily scrum, sprint review, retrospection, all these things comes under scrum ceremonies. Before we are going to start these ceremonies and all, if you want to make anything as a project to do with, generally it starts with product vision and the scope, because product vision and the scope has to be defined by the customer. So based on the product vision and scope, what is that we have identified, or what is that we have decided so far? Based on that, we need to create a product roadmap. Based on the product roadmap, release planning will be made. From there onwards, sprint planning and all, everything will be done accordingly. This is what and how generally this agile planning process will be taken place. So when we are talking about agile planning process, when you are comparing with from traditional to agile and all, this is how it is. This I'm gonna explain you in tomorrow's session, right? Agile project management, how this agile project management planning will be taken place, and how this will be done, right? So what is product vision and scope? I'll take an example, right? So some real example will be taken, and I will be explaining these things and all everything one by one in coming session, because our focus must be something more on to agile project management. Of course, not only on traditional project management, even in agile planning project management also. Of course, there are other steps even, not only these slides, there were other processes which I'm going to explain you in tomorrow session. If you have any questions, please go ahead in regard to this. Vinay?
No, that's fine. Fine.
Right. So this is what generally the differences are. So this is how on a high level note, the difference you can see from waterfall to agile project.
Yeah, Raj, no, I could not consider it much, but yeah, a bit of agile kind of things
I focus more on
it.
agile. Yes, I do that because our focus must be on agile nowadays, because as in when agile is required more. Of course, traditional is required.
Tomorrow, what would be the timing, Raj?
Tomorrow 6 p.m. 6 p.m.
Okay.
Because 6 p.m. Indian Standard Time it is. As we planned earlier. Same time. No changes.
Okay, no worries, yeah.
Right. So,
Okay.
Right. So, right, Vinay, right, Pawan. See you then. Bye.
Yeah, thanks, Raj.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yes, bye.